The night the rain came down over London, the river turned black beneath the iron bridge. It was past midnight when the constable's whistle broke the stillness, echoing along the embankment. A body had been found wedged between the bridge's cold pillars, an older man, well dressed, his silver-tipped umbrella floating beside him. At first glance it seemed a tragic accident, but when they rolled him onto his back the constable saw it, the neat circular hole just beneath his ear, too clean for a fall, too deliberate for chance. By dawn, word of the bridge murder had reached the newspapers, and by noon the case had found its way to Hercule Poirot. He arrived wrapped neatly in his overcoat, umbrella in hand, his moustache untouched by the drizzle. His companion, Captain Hastings, trudged beside him, more interested in avoiding puddles than murder. Inspector Japp met them near the crime scene. "Bit of a puzzle, this one, Poirot," he said, leading them toward the iron structure. "The fellow's name was Geoffrey Langdon, retired banker, lives not far from here, no enemies we can find. Shot at close range, but no gun, no witnesses, no footprints in the mud worth anything." Poirot examined the ground. The bridge's underside dripped constantly, masking sounds, washing away traces. "Mon ami," he murmured, "the rain, it is both our enemy and our friend. It erases, yes, but it also reveals what resists erasure." He knelt beside the body. Langdon's gloved hands were folded across his chest as though placed there deliberately. His shoes were polished, though the soles were damp. From his inner pocket, Poirot extracted a folded scrap of newspaper. A single word was circled in pencil: inheritance. Hastings frowned. Could be anything. An article, a note to himself. "Non," Poirot said softly. "This word, it is chosen. It is meant to speak." The constable nearby added, "Nothing else on him except his watch and a few coins. No wallet." "Ah," Poirot replied, glancing at the man's wristwatch. "But this, Hastings, observe. The watch is stopped at 11:46. Not broken, but stopped, as though it were set to mark a moment." Japp sighed. "You think the killer tampered with it?" "Perhaps, or perhaps our victim did, to leave behind the only thing he could." They followed Japp to Langdon's home later that afternoon, a narrow house off Pimlico. The maid, a timid young woman named Elsie, trembled as she answered the door. "I saw him leave last night, sir," she told them. "He had his umbrella and said he was going to meet someone by the river. Said it wouldn't take long." "Did he say who?" "No, sir. Only that it was about his late wife's affairs." Poirot's eyes flickered. "His wife? She is deceased?" 2 months now," said Japp. "Fell ill rather suddenly. Nothing suspicious according to the coroner, but I've sent for the files anyway." The drawing-room was tastefully arranged but cold. A portrait of Mrs. Langdon hung above the fireplace, a serene woman with sad eyes. On the mantel sat unopened letters tied with a ribbon, and beside them a framed photo of a young man. Poirot lifted it gently. "Their son?" "Yes, sir," said Elsie. "Mr. Arthur Langdon lives abroad. He came for the funeral, then left again. Said he and his father didn't see eye to eye." Poirot studied the photograph, then set it down. And yet the father circled inheritance. "Curious, n'est-ce pas?" Japp thumbed through the letters. "All routine, bills, condolences, nothing odd." But Poirot's gaze had already fallen on something else, a faint watermark on the table, as though from a glass set down hastily. "Ah, Monsieur Langdon was not alone here last night," Poirot murmured. "The glass, its rim shows lipstick. A woman was here." "His maid, maybe," said Hastings. Elsie flushed scarlet. "No, sir, I don't drink in this room." Poirot smiled faintly. Then someone else visited before his fatal walk. They left the house as the evening fog thickened, the river below whispering against the stone. Poirot paused on the bridge, his umbrella tip tapping the rail. "You see, Hastings," he said softly, "the crime, it is not unsolvable. It merely wears the disguise of simplicity. A man shot near midnight, no witnesses, a clue too plain to trust. But what does one do when everything is too neat?" Hastings frowned. "You think it was staged?" Poirot nodded slightly. "Exactement. The watch stopped by intention, the note chosen, the position of the hands. These are not of chaos, but of design. The killer wished us to believe in a certain story, yet forgot one small truth. The river cannot lie." As they turned to leave, a constable called out from beneath the bridge, "Sir, we found something. Caught on the rocks." They hurried down the embankment. The constable held up a gloved hand. In it a single silver cufflink glimmered faintly under the lantern. Engraved on it, the initials A.L. Poirot's expression sharpened. "Arthur Langdon," he murmured. "The prodigal son returns, perhaps earlier than he claimed." The rain began again, soft but relentless, drumming against the bridge's iron ribs. Poirot stared out into the darkness where the water churned. "A murder beneath an iron bridge," he whispered, "and yet the structure stands firm. So must the truth, cold, immovable, waiting for us to uncover it." Hastings shivered. "But what if the truth leads somewhere we'd rather not go?" Poirot turned to him, eyes calm, moustache gleaming even in the dim light. "Then, mon ami, we shall go there none the less. For murder, no matter how cleverly arranged, leaves behind one trace it cannot conceal, the logic of the human heart." The river murmured on, and somewhere beyond the mist a clock struck midnight again. The investigation had only just begun, and already the air beneath. The iron bridge seemed thick with secrets waiting to surface. The following morning the mist still clung to the Thames like a secret not yet willing to be spoken. The iron bridge loomed grey and wet against a pale sky, and on the muddy embankment below constables went about their work with a kind of grim repetition. Photographs, measurements, reports. Hercule Poirot stood quietly apart, his polished shoes immaculate despite the damp ground. He watched them with mild amusement, as if observing a performance whose ending he already knew. Inspector Japp arrived with a cigarette between his lips and an air of irritation. "We've combed the area again," he said. "Nothing new. Whoever shot Langdon was careful. No shell casing, no footprints, no witnesses, only that cuff link." "Which, mon cher Japp," said Poirot softly, "is both too much and too little." "How do you mean?" Poirot's eyes followed the flow of the river. "It is too convenient, is it not? A single object of clear ownership, left behind in a place where everything else has been washed clean. Either our murderer is a fool, or a dramatist," Japp grunted, "or the sun really dropped it, and we're chasing shadows." "Perhaps," said Poirot, "but let us not run too quickly to conclusions. A truth that runs is often a truth that hides." He turned his attention to the bridge itself. The cast iron beams glistened with moisture, rivets lined like soldiers in perfect order. Poirot's gaze moved methodically. Railings, stone base, the support struts below. "You see, Hastings," he murmured, "it is not the large details that speak, but the small ones that whisper." Beneath the bridge he crouched by the stone ledge where the body had been found. There, faint but visible, was a streak of mud with the imprint of something narrow and ridged. Poirot traced it with a gloved fingertip. "Not a shoe," he said softly. "Not a cane. Something metallic. A tripod leg, perhaps. Or, a camera stand." Hastings blinked. "A camera, Poirot? You think someone photographed him?" Poirot's lips curved slightly. "Or pretended to. Monsieur Langdon came here by appointment, non? What if he believed he was to be photographed? Perhaps a portrait, a document, an agreement. Something that required his presence beneath this bridge." Japp frowned. "That's a bit thin." "Indeed," Poirot agreed lightly, "but it is a thread. And you know, mon ami, I have a great fondness for threads." They returned to Langdon's home shortly before noon. The maid, Elsie, was in the kitchen, her eyes red-rimmed from weeping. She curtsied when they entered. "I've not slept, sir. It's dreadful. Truly dreadful." Poirot's tone softened. "You cared for your employer?" "Oh, yes, sir. He was kind, always polite. But these last few weeks he'd been strange, restless. Locked himself in the study at night. I'd hear him talking to someone sometimes, but when I asked, he said I'd imagined it." Poirot tilted his head. "Someone in the house?" "I don't know, sir. I never saw anyone. But one night I found a glass with a lipstick on it, and I thought maybe—" She hesitated, flushing again. "Maybe he had company. I washed it quick. Didn't think it was my place to ask." "Ah," said Poirot softly. "You're a loyal girl, mademoiselle. Loyalty is rare. But tell me, did he receive letters?" "Oh yes, plenty. One came the day before he died." She fumbled through a drawer and pulled out an envelope. The handwriting was delicate, slanted and feminine. The postmark read Chelsea. Japp examined it. No return address, just a single word written inside. "Tonight." Nothing else. Poirot's eyes narrowed. A rendezvous arranged without explanation, yet it was enough to send him out into the rain. He moved into the drawing-room again, letting his eyes wander. His gaze fell on the fireplace, where a faint dust line traced the outline of a missing object. He crouched. Something stood here recently. A clock, perhaps. Elsie nodded. Yes, sir. A small carriage clock. Gold. It's gone missing. I thought maybe it was sent for repair. Poirot rose slowly. Non. It was taken. And the question is, by whom and why? He drifted to the writing desk next. The drawers were neat, almost obsessively so. But one drawer, second from the bottom, stuck slightly when he tried to close it. He pulled it open again and smiled faintly. Inside, behind a stack of correspondence, was a stub of candle and a matchbox from a riverside cafe called the Iron Swan. He pocketed the matchbox thoughtfully. The Iron Swan, he murmured, a fitting companion to our bridge of iron. Hastings, you will accompany me there this evening. When they left, Japp stayed behind to arrange for further questioning. You think this cafe's important? He called after Poirot. Poirot turned at the door, his expression unreadable. I think, my good Japp, that every murderer leaves behind two trails, one of fact and one of feeling. It is the second that tells you why the gun was fired. That evening the Iron Swan was half empty. Smoke hung low under the ceiling beams, and the air carried the heavy scent of gin and damp wool. Poirot and Hastings took a table near the window overlooking the river. After a few moments, Poirot's gaze fixed on a woman seated alone at the far end. She was dressed in mourning black, her gloved hands tight around a glass she did not drink from. Do you see, Hastings, Poirot whispered, how she watches every man who enters, as though each might be one she fears, or one she awaits? Before Hastings could reply, the woman rose abruptly and left a few coins on the table. Poirot followed, his steps silent. Outside, the fog had thickened again, curling around the lampposts. The woman moved quickly toward the bridge, but when Poirot called gently, Madame, une petite moment, s'il vous plaît, she froze. He approached with a courteous bow. You knew Monsieur Langdon. Her eyes widened. Who are you? My name is Hercule Poirot. I investigate his death. For a heartbeat, her composure faltered. I don't know what you mean. I read it in the papers like everyone else. Ah, said Poirot softly. Then you will forgive me if I do not believe you, because Madame, the matchbox from this very café, was found in his desk, and your perfume, jasmine, is still faintly present in his study. Her gloved hand trembled. I didn't kill him. Poirot inclined his head. I did not say that you did, only that you were there, and that you perhaps know who else was. She said nothing, only looked toward the dark river where the bridge's reflection trembled. Then, in a voice barely above the rain, she said, He was frightened, monsieur. He said someone was watching him. I told him not to go last night. He said he had to, that it would all end under the bridge. End? Poirot asked gently. She met his gaze for a brief second, her eyes glassy with terror, because he'd discovered something that wasn't meant to be found. Before Poirot could press further, she turned and disappeared into the mist, her footsteps swallowed by the sound of the river. He watched her go, then whispered, So, the shadows beneath the bridge grow thicker, but at last one sees where the light should fall. As they walked back toward their lodgings, Hastings broke the silence. You think she's involved? Poirot shook his head. Non, Hastings. She's not the hand that fired the gun, but she has touched it, perhaps without knowing. And soon we shall learn whose finger pulled the trigger, because lies, mon ami, are like ripples on the river. They spread wide, but always trace back to the stone that was thrown. And somewhere in the darkness, unseen above the mist, a clock struck 11:46. The next morning dawned with a colourless sky, the kind that made London appear carved from mist. The newspapers had already seized upon the story, Murder Beneath the Iron Bridge, Retired Banker Shot in the Night. But in the small breakfast room of Whitehaven Mansions, Hercule Poirot read without comment, his cup of chocolate steaming gently before him. Hastings, across the table, was restless. I suppose you'll see Japp today, he asked. Poirot looked up. Mais oui, and we shall speak with all who claim to know Monsieur Langdon. The truth, Hastings, is not a painting. It is a mosaic. One must assemble each small tile until the image appears. An hour later they were once again at Langdon's house. Inspector Japp awaited them in the study, sleeves rolled up, eyes sharp from lack of sleep. We've rounded up a few names, he said. Langdon's solicitor, the son's business partner, and the housemaid again. She remembered something else in the night. Bon, said Poirot. Let us begin with the maid. She's the heart of the household. Even in silence she hears what the walls do not. Elsie entered nervously, her apron twisted between her hands. "It came to me last night, sir," she said. "That sound I heard the evening before Mr. Langdon died. It wasn't talking exactly. It was like a man arguing, but only one voice, angry but quiet, as if he didn't want me to hear." Poirot's brow furrowed. "And yet you did." She nodded. "Yes, sir. Then there was a noise, a clink, like metal on glass. And later I saw him in the hallway. He looked pale, said he was going out to settle something once and for all." Poirot exchanged a glance with Japp. "Merci, mademoiselle. You're most observant. One last question. Was his gun kept in the house?" She blinked. "Gun, sir? He never owned one. Said they were vulgar things." Poirot's lips pressed together thoughtfully. Vulgar, perhaps, yet one found him all the same. When she left, the solicitor was shown in, a tall, precise man named Mr. Gilbert Hornby, who looked as though his soul had been ironed along with his trousers. He bowed briefly. "Terrible business, gentlemen. I've managed Mr. Langdon's affairs for 20 years. A sound man, though lately distracted." "In what way?" asked Poirot. Hornby adjusted his spectacles. He had been reviewing his late wife's estate, some dispute over an old trust. I advised him to leave it alone, but he insisted. He said he'd discovered irregularities, though he wouldn't say what. Only that someone would be very unhappy when he was through. "Ah," Poirot murmured. "And this someone? Did he name them?" "No," Hornby said curtly, "but he asked for a draft of a new will, one that cut his son's inheritance in half." Hastings blinked. His son's? Indeed. He meant to transfer a large portion to a charitable fund in his wife's name. I warned him that young Mr. Langdon might contest it, but he wouldn't be swayed. Japp exhaled. So the old man planned to change his will, and that very night ends up shot by the river. Convenient for the son, isn't it? Poirot didn't respond at once. Instead, his gaze fixed upon Hornby's gloves, spotless except for a faint brownish smudge on the left thumb. "You have been in the garden this morning, Monsieur Hornby?" he asked mildly. Hornby frowned. "No, certainly not." "Then perhaps you will forgive me if I say that your gloves tell another story." Poirot smiled politely. "But we will not trouble you further. Pour le moment." Hornby stiffened, muttered something about the indignity of suspicion, and left. As the door closed, Hastings whispered, "Do you think he's lying?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Every man lies, Hastings. The question is, to whom?" The next to arrive was Arthur Langdon himself. He entered with an ease that was almost too studied, dressed impeccably in a tailored suit. His manner was calm, but beneath it was something, impatience perhaps, or fear dressed as confidence. "So, you're the famous Monsieur Poirot," he said, offering a thin smile. "I came as soon as I heard. Terrible thing. My father and I, well, we had our differences, but I never wished him harm." "Bien sûr," said Poirot gently. "The death of a parent, no matter how distant, leaves a wound one does not easily hide. Tell me, monsieur, where were you the night of his death?" "At my club," Arthur replied smoothly. "The Oxford and Regent. I dined there until 10:30, then returned to my rooms. The staff can confirm it." "Ah, yes," Poirot said lightly. "And what of the cufflink found near the body, engraved with your initials?" Arthur's composure flickered. "Then someone's framing me. I lost that cufflink weeks ago. I didn't think much of it." "Lost or given?" Poirot's tone was soft but sharp. Arthur hesitated. No, lost. I'm sure of it." Japp leaned forward. "You and your father quarrelled over money, didn't you?" Arthur gave a tired sigh. He was impossible about money. Wanted to lecture me on responsibility as though I were still a schoolboy. He'd threatened to cut me off before, but he never meant it. Poirot studied him closely, and yet this time he did mean it. He was drawing up a new will. Arthur froze just for a fraction of a second, but in that silence everything spoke. "That's absurd," he said finally, his voice too calm. "If that's true, it's the first I've heard of it." Poirot smiled faintly. "Perhaps, or perhaps you heard it earlier than you would wish us to believe." Arthur rose abruptly. "If you're suggesting I killed him, you're wasting your time. My father had enemies, people he ruined at the bank, schemes gone sour. I'll send my solicitor if you have more questions." When he left, Japp let out a low whistle. Arrogant devil. He's hiding something. Poirot nodded slightly. Oui, but not what you think. He fears being accused, but not because he is guilty. No, Hastings Jap, there is something else. Something that frightens him more than prison. They spent the afternoon interviewing others, Langdon's neighbours, the postman, even the barman at the Iron Swan. Each had their version. One swore he saw a tall man loitering near the bridge that night. Another claimed a woman's voice cried out before the shot. A third said there was no shot at all, only a splash and silence. By dusk, Poirot sat in Langdon's study once more, a soft hum escaping his lips as he arranged notes in precise order. "You see, my friends," he said finally, "the truth does not lie in what they remember, but in what they forget. Each has told us a piece, and yet all their stories overlap upon one point, the bridge, the hour, the loneliness of the place. But one story is missing still." Hastings frowned. "Whose?" "The woman from the cafe," said Poirot quietly. "She knew more than she confessed. She said he was frightened. But of whom?" Japp poured himself a cup of tea. "You think she's our link?" Poirot nodded slowly. "Oui." Her silence is deliberate. She is not merely a witness. She is the axis around which this crime turns. And before another night falls, we must find her again. For somewhere between her fear and her affection lies the voice of deception that speaks the loudest of all. Outside, the rain began once more, soft, persistent and rhythmic, like the ticking of a clock that would not be ignored. The rain that night came down in thin, silvery strands, whispering against the windows of Langdon's study. Poirot sat perfectly still, his hands steepled beneath his chin, the lamplight glinting softly on the polished surface of the desk. On the table before him lay a careful arrangement of items, the cufflink, the matchbox from the Iron Swan, the newspaper scrap with the word inheritance circled, and a single photograph of Langdon's late wife. It was not clutter, but composition, every object a note in a symphony of deceit waiting to be heard. Hastings paced restlessly near the hearth. "I don't see it, Poirot. Everyone has a reason, yes, but none of it fits together. The son wanted money, the solicitor might have feared exposure, and that woman from the cafe, well, she's frightened of something. But it's like trying to fit pieces from 3 different puzzles." Poirot smiled faintly. "Exactly so, mon ami, and yet there is only one puzzle. The difficulty is that each person has touched it from a different angle. They speak not of the same truth, but of the same lie, seen from different directions." He rose suddenly, pacing the length of the rug with delicate precision. "Let us examine, not what they said, but what they wished us to believe. Monsieur Arthur Langdon, his arrogance is a mask, yes. Beneath it lies fear. He does not fear justice, he fears disgrace. His father planned to change his will, to divert the fortune away from the family name. That would be humiliation for a man of pride, but murder? Non. Pride kills slowly. It does not fire bullets." Hastings frowned. Then Hornby, the solicitor. He had access to the estate records. If Langdon found something irregular, then Monsieur Hornby's reputation and perhaps his livelihood would crumble, Poirot finished softly. He too had motive. But greed, Hastings, is a loud emotion. When it speaks, it leaves traces. Bank transfers, secrecy, haste. Hornby's hands are steady, his manner controlled. His smudge of dirt this morning, though. Ah, that I do not forget. He lied, but not about money. About where he was last night, perhaps. Japp entered then, shaking off his coat. "We've checked the club. Arthur Langdon did sign in that night, stayed till 10:30. But here's the rub. He left out the back entrance. No one saw him return. He could have been anywhere between 11 and midnight." Poirot nodded slowly, as though confirming a thought already half formed. The hour of the stopped watch. 11:46. "Exactly," said Japp. "But there's more. I sent a man to the Iron Swan. Turns out our mystery woman, name of Clara Wren, used to work at Langdon's bank years ago. Left under personal circumstances, as they put it. Nobody seems to know what those circumstances were." "Non," Poirot said, eyes glinting. "They know, but they will not tell. That is far more interesting." He motioned toward the photograph of Mrs. Langdon on the desk. "And this, Hastings, look closely. You see how the frame bears a faint mark as if something heavier once stood beside it? There was another picture here, I suspect of Mademoiselle Wren." Hastings stared. You think she and Langdon? Poirot lifted a brow. Love, Hastings, is an excellent motive for silence, and a dreadful one for truth. They went to question Clara Wren again that evening. She lived in a small flat overlooking the river, modest but neat, its furnishings chosen with care. When Poirot entered, she looked weary, as if the night had already lasted too long. "I told you everything," she said softly. "Non, madame," Poirot replied. "You told me everything that could be spoken without tears. It is the unspoken that interests me now. You loved Geoffrey Langdon, did you not?" Her composure faltered. "Once," she whispered. "Years ago, before his wife found out, before he ended it. He said he couldn't destroy his reputation. But after she died, he wrote to me again, said he wanted to put things right." Hastings leaned forward. "Put things right? How?" Clara hesitated, her fingers twisting the handkerchief in her lap. "He said he'd discovered something about his wife's death, that she hadn't simply fallen ill. He wanted to tell me everything the next night by the bridge. But when I arrived, he was already gone." Poirot studied her closely. "And you heard nothing? Saw no one?" "I saw a light," she said slowly, "from under the bridge. I thought someone was waiting there with him. Then the shot. I ran." Japp frowned. "You didn't see who fired?" "No, only a shadow. But I know it wasn't Arthur. The figure was smaller, stockier." Poirot's gaze softened. "Merci, madame. You have helped more than you know." When they left her flat, the fog was thick enough to swallow sound. Hastings walked beside Poirot in silence until they reached the embankment. "So now we've got 4 motives," he said. "Arthur's money, Hornby's reputation, Clara's love, and perhaps the wife's death as the key to all of it. But how do they connect?" Poirot smiled faintly. "They connect as all human hearts do, mon ami, through weakness. The man who kills rarely does so for one reason alone. It is always a combination, a tangle of fear, vanity, jealousy, and chance. We must discover which of these strings was pulled hardest." They met Japp again the next morning at Scotland Yard. The inspector had a new report waiting. "You'll like this, Poirot. The coroner's analysis came back. The bullet that killed Langdon, small caliber, fired from close range. And the angle's odd. It came from slightly below, not straight on." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Below, meaning the killer stood lower on the slope beneath the bridge, not beside him." "Right. And another thing," Japp added, flipping a page. "We found faint traces of oil and graphite on Langdon's coat sleeve, like he brushed against machinery. Maybe a camera tripod, like you said." Poirot gave a small nod of satisfaction. "Alors, now the picture sharpens. Langdon thought he was meeting someone for a private discussion, perhaps to sign something, an agreement, a confession, who knows? But instead he was lured beneath the bridge. Someone brought an apparatus, a camera perhaps, to make him believe this meeting was official, harmless, and then bang." Hastings leaned back. "So we're back to Hornby, aren't we? He could have forged something, documents, wills. Maybe Langdon found out." "Possible," said Japp, "but there's no proof. His firm's clean." Poirot tapped a finger on the desk, eyes distant. "No, not Hornby alone. He would not risk his position with such vulgarity, but he may have assisted someone who needed his knowledge." "Arthur?" "Too obvious," said Poirot. "The son is foolish, yes, but murder requires cunning. No, Hastings. It is someone who understood both love and law. Someone close enough to Langdon to know his habits, and clever enough to make others appear guilty." He fell silent then, lost in thought. The clock ticked quietly. The fog outside the window thickened, cloaking the city in ghostly stillness. At last Poirot spoke, almost to himself. "There is one thing that unites them all, the will. Langdon meant to change it. But that was not merely about money, it was about truth. He sought to leave something behind, not just wealth. Perhaps a confession, perhaps an accusation. Whatever it was, someone feared it enough to kill for it." Japp exhaled. "And you think you can prove it?" Poirot's eyes sparkled. "In time, mon ami. The web grows tighter, and soon those who spin it will find themselves caught. But first, we must look not at who had reason to kill Geoffrey Langdon, but who had reason to stop him from speaking." And with that, Poirot turned back toward the window, watching the iron bridge loom faintly through the mist, as though it too were waiting for him to finish the puzzle buried beneath its unyielding shadow. The morning broke with a pale gleam of sunlight that struggled through the London haze, scattering faint gold over the Thames. The iron bridge glistened as though newly washed of sin, and yet to Poirot it seemed to gleam with irony rather than innocence. He stood there with Hastings, watching the constables dredge the lower banks. They had been at it since dawn, boots sinking into the mud, their voices echoing faintly through the still air. Then came a shout, urgent, triumphant. "Inspector, we've got something!" Japp hurried down the embankment, coat flapping behind him. Moments later he reappeared, holding a small pistol wrapped carefully in cloth. "There it is," he said, satisfaction roughening his voice. ".32 caliber, same as the bullet from Langdon's skull. Found in the reeds, about 30 yards downstream." Hastings whistled softly. "That looks like it, doesn't it? Must have been tossed into the river right after the shot." Poirot said nothing. He merely bent close, examining the weapon through the cloth, his expression unreadable. "You are certain it was not planted?" Japp scoffed. "Planted? In the river? Come now, Poirot. No one but the killer could have dropped it there." Poirot's gaze drifted toward the slow-moving current. "Perhaps. But I have learned, my friend, that the hand which hides evidence can also place it most cleverly. Still, the find ignited a fire of activity at Scotland Yard. Fingerprints were taken, reports written, statements revisited. By afternoon, the pistol had yielded its secret. Clear prints on the grip, belonging to none other than Arthur Langdon. Japp slapped the report onto the table with something close to triumph. "There you are. The son's our man. Motive, opportunity, evidence. It fits like a glove." Hastings looked uneasy. He did leave the club early that night, and he had reason enough, what with the will. "Yes," said Poirot softly, "but perhaps too much reason. You see, Hastings, a murderer who leaves behind a single incriminating clue is careless, but one who leaves behind a perfect collection, the gun, the prints, the motive, that man is considerate. Too considerate," Japp grunted. "You can doubt all you like, but we've got enough to charge him. He'll be in custody by evening." Poirot inclined his head slightly. "Ah, mon ami Japp, you are the man of action. I, alas, am but a man of order. Let us hope your action does not disturb it too much." Arthur Langdon was arrested that same afternoon. The press swarmed the scene, eager for photographs of the fallen gentleman's son in handcuffs. He maintained his composure, though his jaw tightened with restrained fury. "I didn't kill him," he said quietly as they led him away. "You're all being fooled." Hastings, watching from the side, whispered to Poirot, "He looks genuinely shocked." "Oui," said Poirot, his eyes following the young man, "because perhaps he is. Or perhaps he plays the role of innocence with the conviction of truth. Either way, Hastings, it is the same. He believes himself wronged." That evening Japp insisted Poirot join him for supper at the Yard. "A toast," he declared, raising his glass. "To efficiency. One less case to haunt us." Poirot's lips curved faintly. "To efficiency, yes. But not yet, I think, to justice." Japp frowned. "What's that supposed to mean? We've got the weapon, the fingerprints, the motive. Even the timing matches the stopped watch. You said yourself, 11:46. That's when he left the club." "Indeed," Poirot murmured. "But I did not say he set the watch, only that someone did. There is a difference, mon cher." Japp's irritation flared. "You're seeing ghosts where there aren't any?" "Non," said Poirot calmly. "I see patterns. It is the same with my moustache. Every hair must point in its proper direction. So too with truth. And here, one hair grows crooked." Later, alone in his apartment, Poirot reviewed the evidence once more. The gun, the cufflink, the note, the hour, all tidy, almost staged in their perfection. He closed his eyes, replaying each testimony, the maid's trembling voice, the solicitor's too steady gaze, the woman Clara's whispered fear. One thread, he thought, must connect them all. But which? A knock at the door startled him. It was Hastings, flushed and breathless. "Poirot, you must come quickly. There's been a development." Within the hour they were at the Yard again. Japp stood grim-faced, the triumph gone from his voice. Langdon's solicitor, Hornby, was found dead. Shot himself in his office an hour ago. Left a note confessing to Langdon's murder. Hastings gasped. "Good heavens! Then that's it! The case is solved!" Poirot said nothing. He reached for the note, reading the elegant handwriting carefully. It was brief, almost rehearsed. "I could not bear the guilt any longer. Geoffrey Langdon discovered my embezzlement. He meant to expose me. I shot him in desperation. May God forgive me. He folded it slowly, then met Japp's eyes. And where was the weapon? His own pistol, same caliber as the one from the bridge. We've compared the bullets. They match perfectly. Poirot looked thoughtful. How very neat. 2 guns, 2 notes, 2 confessions. Hastings stared. You don't believe it? Non, mon ami, said Poirot softly. I believe it, but only as one believes a play well performed. The curtain falls, the audience applauds, and yet one knows the villain still breathes behind the set. He moved toward the window, gazing out at the fading twilight. The city below was alive with carriages and lamplight, the world continuing on as if murder could be so easily buried. Hornby was many things, a coward perhaps, but not theatrical. This letter, it is too clean, too final. A man in despair does not write with such care. And why now? Why after the arrest of Arthur Langdon? Guilt does not wait for the applause to end. Japp rubbed his temples. You think someone forced his hand? I think, Poirot said. Someone wanted the play to close before the final act could begin. He turned, his gaze sharp now. Hornby was no fool. He may have helped conceal something, yes, but to kill Langdon? No. He was made to believe he had no choice. Perhaps he was blackmailed. Perhaps his signature lies somewhere it should not. Either way, his death is convenient for someone else. Hastings hesitated. The real killer still out there, then? Poirot nodded slowly. And growing bold. The first murder silenced a man seeking truth. The second silenced one who knew too much of it. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly across the river. Poirot closed the blinds, his expression grim but serene. We must not yet congratulate ourselves, mes amis. A false victory is still a defeat, only wrapped in ribbon. The real criminal waits in the dark, assured we will rest. But Hercule Poirot, he does not rest. He lifted the cufflink from the evidence tray once more, holding it delicately between thumb and forefinger. The initials caught the lamplight, A.L., and gleamed like a taunt. No, he murmured. The murderer has not finished his work, and when he strikes again, we must be ready. For the bridge beneath which the first truth drowned will yield another secret yet. Outside, the rain began anew, washing the city clean of dust, but not of deceit. The river moved on, silent and indifferent, carrying with it the weight of 2 men's deaths, and the promise of a third yet to come. The next morning broke under a heavy pall of cloud, the kind that seemed to press low over the rooftops of London, sealing in the city's secrets. The newspapers were filled with headlines of Hornby's suicide and the supposed conclusion of the Iron Bridge affair. But in the quiet of Whitehaven mansions, Hercule Poirot sat before an untouched breakfast, his gaze distant, his mind moving far beyond the printed word. Hastings entered briskly, hat in hand. Everyone's saying the case is over, he began. Arthur Langdon will be released by noon, the Yards taking Hornby's note as gospel. Poirot looked up slowly. Oui. And yet, does it not seem strange to you, Hastings, that a man burdened with guilt should take his life only after his innocence is assured by the arrest of another? Hastings frowned. You mean, after Arthur was caught, he should have felt relieved, not desperate? Precisely. When a man kills himself, it is because his silence has become unbearable. But Hornby, he wrote too neatly, died too tidily, and left behind an ending fit for the newspapers. Life, mon ami, rarely arranges itself so symmetrically. There came a knock at the door. Japp entered, hat pushed back, eyes shadowed from a long night. Morning, Poirot. I thought I'd find you brooding. Before you start, yes, I know what you're thinking. You don't buy Hornby's confession. Poirot gestured, toward a chair. Sit, Japp. Tell me, what have you done with the papers from the late Mrs. Langdon's estate? Japp blinked. Mrs. Langdon? I thought we'd put that aside. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Ah, but you see, we cannot put aside the dead when they are still speaking through the living. Bring me her records. There is a shadow, I think, that began before the bridge, before even the sun or the solicitor. The first deception inspector may have been hers. By afternoon, Japp returned with a small leather file. Poirot opened it carefully. Inside were statements, correspondences, and one yellowing letter, signed in a fine, looping hand by Clara Wren. Hastings leaned forward. But she was his mistress. Oui, said Poirot softly, and his wife's friend once upon a time. That was the part nobody mentioned. You see, the past, like a ghost, returns to disturb the living. The letter was dated 12 years earlier. Its tone was cautious, affectionate, and frightened. You were right. She suspects something. I should never have gone to her house. If she finds out what I told you about the missing funds, it will ruin us both. Poirot's eyes glinted. Funds, Hastings. Not romance, not jealousy. Money. The same thread that runs through Hornby's so-called embezzlement. Japp scratched his chin. You're saying the wife was in on it? Poirot shook his head. Non. She was the victim of it, or perhaps the guardian of it. But someone, somewhere, feared that the truth of those missing funds might resurface. When Langdon reopened his wife's estate records 2 months ago, he disturbed the dust on something very old, and someone killed him for it. Hastings frowned. But who? Hornby's dead. Arthur's free. Clara, well, she seems more like a frightened woman than a murderer. Poirot's expression darkened. Frightened, yes, but of whom? That is what we must learn. They visited her that same evening. The flat overlooking the river was dimly lit, the curtains drawn against the storm. Clara Wren looked paler than before, her hands trembling as she poured tea. I heard about Mr. Hornby, she whispered. Poor man. I suppose justice has been served. Poirot's eyes never left her face. Justice, madam? Or convenience? She froze. What do you mean? You were acquainted with Mrs. Langdon before her death, were you not? Clara's hand shook. Yes, years ago. We were friends. Until she found out about Geoffrey and me. I left the bank soon after. And yet you kept writing to him. She bit her lip. I had to. There were matters unresolved. He thought someone at the bank was stealing from the clients. He asked for my help, but I told him not to get involved again. Again, Poirot said quietly. So it was not the first time he uncovered such a crime. Clara's eyes flickered. There was an old case, years before. The Langdons' account had been tampered with money missing, forged signatures. Geoffrey tried to cover it up to protect his wife's reputation. He said he would deal with it privately. I don't know what he did, but after that the matter disappeared. Poirot leaned forward. And who, madame, worked with him at the bank in those years? She hesitated. Mr. Hornby, of course. And Arthur, when he was young. He was apprenticing there then. Hastings stared. Arthur? He worked under Hornby? Yes, for a short while, but he left abruptly. Poirot's gaze sharpened. Ah, now the web begins to take form. Tell me, madame, was it you who sent the letter that brought Langdon to the bridge that night? Her face went white. No, I swear it. He asked me to meet him there, but when I arrived he was gone. I never sent that note. Poirot nodded gently. I believe you. He rose, taking his hat. Merci, madame. You have been most helpful. As they stepped back into the rain-soaked street, Hastings looked bewildered. Poirot, what are you thinking? You've gone pale. Poirot's voice was low. 12 years ago, a theft was buried. A theft tied to both Hornby and Arthur. Langdon hid it to protect his wife, but now, with his wife dead, he sought to amend his sins. He reopened the records, perhaps even confronted one of them. And that person feared exposure, so they killed him, then silenced Hornby to seal the past once more. Japp's voice came rough behind them. And you think Arthur was involved back then? Poirot nodded slowly. Involved, but not alone. Someone older, cleverer, who understood how to manipulate both him and Hornby. Who? Poirot looked toward the dark outline of the bridge in the distance. We must return there tonight. There is one truth still anchored in the mud. They went back after midnight. The rain had eased, but the river hissed faintly beneath the iron beams. Poirot's lantern swept across the stones, pausing at the base where the water met the arch. There, he said quietly. You see, Hastings, the mark from the tripod, the same as before, but another beside it, deeper, older, and stained with oil. It has been used before. Not this week, not this year. Years ago. Japp bent low. What are you saying? That someone used this bridge for something before the murder? Oui, a meeting place perhaps, or an exchange. Langdon returned here because he recognized it. This was where his past crime began, and where someone decided it must end. Poirot turned toward the black water. The river remembers, even when men do not. I think we shall find that Hornby's confession was written under duress. And the handwriting, if we look closely enough, it will show the trembling of fear, not remorse. He did not take his own life. He was murdered. Hastings shivered. By whom? Poirot looked back at the bridge, his expression solemn. By the one who stood to lose everything if Geoffrey. Langdon's conscience awoke. The son, yes, but guided, protected and manipulated by another. Someone who has always been just beyond suspicion. He straightened, his breath fogging in the chill air. Tomorrow we revisit Arthur Langdon, but not as the accused Hastings, as the accomplice. The crime beneath this bridge was born 12 years ago, and only now do we begin to see whose shadow truly fell across the water that night. The wind stirred, carrying the faint clang of a passing steamer bell. Beneath the iron girders, the Thames flowed on, dark as memory, patient as guilt, bearing the echo of the past toward its final reckoning. The following day dawned grey and sullen, as if the city itself hesitated to face what the night had whispered. Poirot, immaculate as ever, stood by the window of his flat gazing through the mist that curled along the Thames. His reflection stared back, sharp, composed, and very still. Hastings entered, hat in hand, visibly anxious. "Poirot," he began, "Jap's been asking what you're planning. He says the case is already solved twice over, and you're still looking for ghosts." Poirot smiled faintly, turning from the glass. "Ah, my dear Hastings, but it is the ghost who often tells the truest story. The living are too clever. They rearrange the furniture of facts to suit their comfort. But the dead, they leave everything exactly where it was." He moved toward the table where the evidence was laid out in precise order, as though part of a ritual. "It is time," he murmured, "to invite our suspects to tea." By late afternoon, the drawing-room at Whitehaven Mansions had been arranged like a stage. 3 chairs faced Poirot's small writing desk, one for Arthur Langdon, another for Clara Wren, and the third for Inspector Japp, who was already fidgeting as if trapped in a performance he didn't quite understand. "Is this a conference or a séance?" he grumbled. "Neither," said Poirot lightly. "It is an experiment in human temperature. We shall observe who sweats first." Arthur Langdon arrived first, looking worn but defiant. His release from custody had done little to improve his temper. "I don't see the point of this," he said stiffly. "You've already made me look like a murderer once." "Patience, monsieur," Poirot said kindly. "You will see. This time it is not accusation I offer, but clarity." Clara entered soon after, hesitant, her dark coat drawn tightly about her. She avoided Arthur's gaze, her gloved hands twisting in her lap. When all were seated, Poirot placed before them a small silver pocket watch, the same one retrieved from Geoffrey Langdon's body. Its cracked glass gleamed faintly under the lamplight. "This," he said softly, "is the last thing Monsieur Langdon touched before he died. The time, 11:46, was no coincidence. It was not the hour of death, as everyone assumes. It was a message." He stopped the hands. "Himself," Arthur scoffed. "A message? To whom?" Poirot smiled faintly. "To whomever he knew would come after him, but let us see who understands it best." He set the watch ticking again, its rhythmic beat unnaturally loud in the silence. "Observe carefully. I have cleaned the glass of dust and restored its mechanism. Now, when the minute hand strikes the 12, something curious will happen." The room held its breath. As the second hand reached its mark, a faint click echoed from inside the casing, barely audible, but distinct. Poirot opened the back of the watch with a flick of his thumbnail. Inside, neatly folded, was a tiny scrap of paper. Japp leaned forward, astonished. "Good Lord! How on earth—" Poirot removed it delicately and unfolded it. The writing was faint but legible. Same place, same lie, different hands. Arthur's face went white. Clara made a small strangled sound and looked away. "Curious, n'est-ce pas?" Poirot said softly. "A dying man hides a message in a watch, one which must be reopened by a ticking mechanism, as though time itself must pass before truth can breathe. It tells us 2 things, that the crime was not his first, and that the same deceit which killed him had been committed once before, years ago." Japp frowned. "You mean the old embezzlement at the bank?" "Just so," said Poirot. "But this time, different hands pulled the strings. Let us discover whose." He turned his gaze to Arthur. "Monsieur Langdon, do you recall the case 12 years ago? The missing trust funds? Your father took the blame quietly to protect another, did he not?" Arthur's lips parted, but no sound came. It was you, Poirot continued gently. You were young, foolish, in debt and guided by someone you trusted. That person persuaded you to move the money temporarily, to correct the records later. Only someone else profited, and when the theft was discovered, your father shielded you. He called it a clerical error. He dismissed the investigation, but he never forgot. Years later, when your mother died, he reopened the files and found the real thief was not you, but the one who had encouraged you. Arthur turned sharply toward Clara, fury flaring across his face. You! She rose from her chair, trembling. I didn't steal anything. Poirot's voice cut through the rising tension, calm and measured. No, madame. You did not steal with your hands, only with your silence. It was Hornby who took the money, but it was you who forged the papers to conceal it. Your handwriting, your intimate knowledge of the accounts, perfectly suited to deceive. But when Langdon discovered it, he intended to expose the truth. That is why you feared him, and that is why you met him under the bridge. She shook her head violently. No, he asked me there. He wanted to talk about the past. I didn't kill him. Poirot inclined his head. Indeed, I believe you did not. But you were not alone that night, were you? There was another, someone who followed you. Arthur's eyes darkened. You think it was me? Think? Poirot smiled faintly. No, monsieur, I know. Arthur rose abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. You've no proof. Ah, but I do. Poirot reached for the watch once more. When your father died, his blood splattered the face of this watch. It was cleaned too carefully. Only one person could have known how to stop its hands and open the secret compartment. The mechanism was patented by your father's old firm, a design he'd shared only with you. He knew that whoever found the watch would reveal themselves by trying to unlock it. And who came to me this morning, demanding it returned as a keepsake? Arthur froze. Poirot's gaze softened, not triumphant but sorrowful. You see, mon ami, your father's last message was not an accusation. It was forgiveness. He wrote same place, same lie, different hands to tell us that the crime repeated itself, but that you were not alone this time. Hornby died because you panicked. You confronted him after your father's death, and he feared you would expose him, so he wrote that false confession. But it was you who pressed the gun into his hand and made it seem suicide. The silence that followed was unbearable. Outside, the faint toll of St. Clement's bell drifted through the fog. Arthur's shoulders sagged. His voice came hollow. He wanted to ruin me. My father. Always preaching, always disappointed. He said he'd change the will again, leave everything to charity. I just wanted to stop him. Clara covered her face, sobbing. Japp stepped forward quietly. That'll be enough now. Arthur turned to Poirot. You should have left it alone. No one would have known. Poirot's eyes were gentle but unyielding. Perhaps, but monsieur, truth is like the river beneath the bridge. It erodes every lie in time, no matter how well it is built. Arthur laughed bitterly, then stopped as if realizing something too late. The watch. He left it for you, didn't he? Poirot inclined his head. Oui, because he knew that Hercule Poirot would see what others overlooked. When the door closed behind them and the echo of footsteps faded, Poirot stood alone for a moment, staring at the ticking watch still open on his desk. The hands moved again now, unstopped, untampered, time restored to its course. He whispered softly, almost to the ghost of Geoffrey Langdon himself. It is finished, mon pauvre. The bridge bears no more secrets. And outside, as if in answer, the Thames gave a low murmur, carrying away the last ripple of deception into the dark, endless current of London's heart. The night after Arthur Langdon's confession settled over London like a suffocating fog. The newspapers would not yet print the story. Japp had insisted it remain confidential until the official statement, but word of something scandalous in the Langdon affair had already begun to ripple through the city's whispers. Poirot, however, was not celebrating victory. He sat alone in his study, the ticking of Geoffrey Langdon's repaired pocket watch echoing in the silence like a pulse. Its rhythmic beat should have been reassuring, a symbol that order had returned, but instead it unsettled him. Something he felt was not yet in place. The telephone rang shortly after midnight. Poirot answered, his tone calm as ever, though his heart gave the smallest, quietest tremor. Poirot, it's Japp. His voice was tight. Urgent. You'd better get down to the yard. There's been an incident. Within the hour, Poirot and Hastings arrived to find the evidence room in chaos. A constable stood pale-faced by the door, stammering as Japp paced like a man possessed. The glass cabinet where key items had been stored, the watch, the gun, the letter from Hornby, was shattered. Papers littered the floor like fallen leaves. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, surveying the wreckage. "It appears someone has tidied in a most untidy fashion." Japp turned sharply. "Don't start your jokes now, Poirot. The watch is gone, the gun too, and Hornby's suicide note vanished." Hastings blinked. "But that's impossible. The room's locked every night." "It was," Japp said grimly. "The lock wasn't forced. Someone used a key." Poirot's brows drew together, his voice low. "Then it was not a burglar. It was someone inside. Someone who fears what the evidence would soon reveal." Japp rubbed a hand over his face. "We've got men questioning everyone on duty tonight. But it doesn't make sense. Arthur's in custody now. Who else would want the evidence gone?" Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Perhaps someone who wishes to prove the case too quickly, or perhaps someone who no longer trusts what truth it might tell." He crouched beside the cabinet, his gloved fingers brushing over the broken glass. "Observe, Hastings. The fragments are scattered outward, not inward. That means it was broken from the inside. Someone opened the case, took what they needed, and then smashed it to disguise their access." Hastings frowned. "But who could manage that without being seen?" Poirot's gaze drifted toward the far end of the corridor, where a single lamp flickered weakly. "A question, mon ami, to which the answer must lie in shadows." By morning the yard was buzzing with unrest. Japp's men turned up nothing. The watch, the gun, the note, all gone without trace. The constable who'd been posted at the evidence room swore he'd heard nothing, seen nothing, only that the light flickered once around midnight. "Couldn't have been more than a few minutes," he said nervously. "When I checked, the door was still locked." Poirot examined him carefully, then asked, "Did anyone else come by, perhaps with a message or an errand?" The constable hesitated. "Well, yes, sir. A woman. Said she was from the records office. Wanted to verify a signature on the Langdon file." Japp's head snapped up. "Name?" "She didn't say, sir, but she was polite. Brown hair, dark coat." Poirot's voice turned very soft. "And perfume?" The constable blinked. "Yes, something faint. Jasmine, I think." Hastings inhaled sharply. "Clara Wren." Japp swore under his breath. "I'll have her brought in at once." But by the time they reached her flat, the rooms were empty. The curtains stirred with the draught from an open window. A teacup lay on the floor, broken, still faintly warm. Beside it, on the table, was a note, short, hurried, ink smudged as if written with shaking hands. "He made me do it. Forgive me. I'm leaving before they find me." No signature, but the paper smelled faintly of jasmine. Poirot read it twice, then set it down, his face unreadable. "She didn't write this of her own accord," he said quietly. "It is too careful in its haste, too composed in its panic." Japp scowled. "You think she's been taken?" "Non, mon ami. Persuaded. There is a difference." He walked slowly about the room, his eyes moving from object to object. The empty coat hook, the half-drunk glass of water, the wastebasket filled with torn pages. Stooping, he retrieved one scrap, a corner of newspaper bearing the faint print of an advertisement. "Passenger Steamship Aurora. Departure. Thursday 9 p.m. Le Havre." Poirot held it up to the light. "Our Madame Clara does not flee across the city. She flees across the sea." Japp groaned. "We'll alert the ports then. Blast it, Poirot. Why would she run now? She wasn't the killer." Poirot turned slowly toward him. "Perhaps not. But someone wishes us to believe she was, and with the evidence vanished, it will be all too easy to convince the world that Hercule Poirot's case was never solved at all." That afternoon, Poirot returned to his flat, pacing in deep thought. Hastings followed uneasily. "You think this is connected to Arthur somehow?" Poirot shook his head. "No. Arthur Langdon is but a pawn. His guilt, his fear, his very confession arranged for convenience. But now someone moves to sweep the board entirely. You see, Hastings, when the truth draws too near, the guilty do not hide the body. They hide the proof. It is a subtler art." He stopped suddenly, looking toward his desk. The watch had been there that morning before it was stolen. The image of its gleaming face lingered in his mind, its secret compartment, the message folded within. And then, Like a breath of wind through smoke, something surfaced in his thoughts. He went to the fireplace, crouched, and lifted the small tray of ashes. They were fine, soft, undisturbed. But there, half buried beneath the grey dust, lay a small strip of scorched metal, the hinge from the watch's inner cover. "Ah," he whispered. "So, the evidence has not vanished. It has merely changed form." Hastings leaned closer. "What is it?" "The clue that was meant to burn away Hastings. Someone entered here last night before going to the yard. They sought to destroy what they could not steal entirely. But look, this hinge bears traces of acid, not flame. And who has access to such things? Someone from the yard, perhaps? Or someone who works with documents and ink," Poirot said softly. "A records clerk, or a secretary. Someone invisible to men of authority." He turned to Hastings, his eyes sharp as glass. "Have you ever noticed, mon ami, that when a crime is nearly solved, it is not the murderer who trembles, but the accomplice, the one who fears being named by the guilty before the gallows takes them both?" The realization struck him like a chill. "We must go to Jap, immediately." But when they arrived, they found the inspector at his desk, pale and shaken. He looked up as they entered. "Poirot, we've just received word. Clara Wren's body was found at the river docks, drowned. The coroner says she'd been dead at least 12 hours. Hastings gasped. "Then she never wrote that note?" "No," said Poirot softly, his voice grave. "She wrote something else, something the murderer feared might yet be found." He stepped closer, his expression darkening with resolve. "We are no longer chasing justice for Geoffrey Langdon, Jap. We are chasing the one who believes they have erased it, and if I am not mistaken, that person still walks among us, in uniform perhaps, or in respectability, but trembling now because the vanishing of evidence leaves behind its own trail, more damning than any proof." Outside, thunder rumbled faintly over the city, as though the storm itself had been listening, and had decided at last to move closer. The rain began again that night, thin and relentless, tapping against the window panes of Whitehaven mansions like fingers that would not rest. Poirot stood by the hearth, silent and motionless, the faint glow of the fire lighting his profile. Hastings, sitting opposite, could not hide his unease. "It feels wrong, Poirot," he said finally. "Clara's death, everything about it. It's as if the killer is laughing at us." Poirot's gaze did not move from the fire. "You're right, mon ami. The murderer has played one final card, and with the precision of an artist. Each death, Langdon, Hornby, now poor Clara, has been arranged not for necessity, but for timing, each struck just as truth approached." Hastings frowned. "Then it's someone close to the investigation. Someone watching." "Precisely." Poirot turned then, his eyes sharp as glass. "And that is why they must believe we are blind. When the hunter believes his prey confused, then he comes near enough to be caught." Before Hastings could reply, a knock sounded at the door. Jap entered, soaked through from the storm, his hat clutched tightly in one hand. "Evening, Poirot. I wouldn't have bothered you this late, but something's happened. Something bad." Poirot gestured for him to continue. "Arthur Langdon's dead," Jap said flatly. The words seemed to freeze the air. Hastings stood. "Dead? How?" "Shot. At close range. Found in his cell not 2 hours ago. Guard says he heard nothing. Gun left beside the body. Looks like suicide, but..." He hesitated. "It doesn't smell right." Poirot's expression did not change, but his voice lowered, grave and certain. "It is not suicide. It is the final move." They went together to the yard. The corridors were quiet, dimly lit. The hour too late for bustle. Arthur's body lay in the infirmary, the harsh white light revealing the final indignity of death. His face was oddly peaceful, as though he had been caught mid-thought. Jap gestured toward the pistol lying beside him. "Same caliber as the Langdon case. The coroner says it's the same weapon, in fact." "The same." Poirot knelt beside the body, examining the weapon with careful detachment. "Curious. The gun vanished with the evidence, n'est-ce pas? And now it returns, like a ghost come home." He rose slowly, glancing at Jap. "Tell me, who discovered the body?" "One of the constables, Harris. Said he was doing rounds, found the door unlocked." "Unlocked," Poirot repeated softly. "How efficient. How generous of the murderer to make our work easier." He stepped closer to Arthur's body, adjusting the cuff of the man's sleeve with a delicate touch. No powder burns. The shot was fired from a distance. The hand that killed him was not his own. Hastings looked sick. Then it was someone inside the yard. Poirot nodded. Someone with the authority to enter his cell unnoticed. Someone who moves among uniforms and keys and paper. The unseen servant of justice who serves only themselves. Japp cursed under his breath. I'll have every man questioned by morning, but damn it, Poirot, this makes no sense. If Arthur's dead, the case is over. What could the killer still want? Poirot's voice was quiet, but every syllable carried weight. To survive, Japp. To erase every thread that might lead to them. The truth was reaching too near, so they cut the last rope. As he spoke, something glimmered faintly beneath Arthur's hand. A small folded scrap of paper. Poirot lifted it gently, unfolding it with care. A single word was written there in a trembling hand. Bridge. He stared at it for a long moment, then turned to Japp. Seal this room. Post no announcement of his death until dawn. The murderer believes himself safe. Let him believe it a little longer. By morning, London's sky was a cold, iron grey. Poirot and Hastings stood once more beneath the towering ribs of the iron bridge. The river, swollen from rain, moved with a quiet, merciless rhythm. Hastings shivered. Why, here again, Poirot? Why bring us back to this dreadful place? Because, Poirot said softly, it began here, and it must end here. Geoffrey Langdon, Hornby, Clara, Arthur, all threads that lead back beneath this bridge. There is something still hidden, something so small, so simple, that we have all overlooked it. He knelt near the stone ledge where the body had been found weeks before. His gloved fingers brushed along the base of the pillar. Here, Hastings, see. The mark from the tripod still remains, faint but distinct. But beside it, another indentation, newer, sharper. Hastings crouched beside him. A boot print? No, said Poirot. A heel, a woman's heel. He looked up, eyes alight. Clara was here that night, but not alone. There was another woman. She moved with authority, precision, someone who could stand beside a dying man and not tremble. And Hastings, there is only one woman who fits that pattern. Before Hastings could speak, a voice echoed through the fog. Monsieur Poirot, you're early. They turned. A figure stepped from the shadows. Inspector Japp. Or rather, a version of him that no longer carried the weariness of late nights and long guilt. His face was set, his eyes unreadable. Poirot straightened, his expression calm. You should not have come, mon ami. Japp, or the man pretending to be him, smiled faintly. You knew, didn't you? From the start. Poirot inclined his head. From the moment the evidence vanished without breaking the lock. You see, only one man had both access and motive, a man who could move through the yard unquestioned. But you, my dear colleague, underestimated one thing, the precision of Hercule Poirot's memory. When last we stood here, I noticed the faint scent of carbolic soap on the air, the kind used only in the forensic rooms, and that same scent followed me to your office yesterday. The man's face hardened. You talk too much. Oui, Poirot agreed softly, but it is not I who speaks the last word tonight. He stepped aside just as another pair of footsteps approached from the fog. The real Inspector Japp emerged, revolver in hand, his eyes blazing with fury. Drop it, Harris! The impostor froze. For a moment silence stretched between them. Then, in a sudden burst, the false Japp turned, gun rising. A single shot cracked through the mist. Hastings flinched, but the bullet struck harmlessly against the stone. The next moment Japp's own shot rang out, and the impostor crumpled where he stood, collapsing beneath the shadow of the bridge. When the echo faded, only the river spoke again, murmuring its cold applause. Later, as dawn broke over the city, Poirot and Japp stood side by side. The body of the impostor, Sergeant Harris, the yard's long-trusted evidence clerk, had been carried away. His pockets revealed everything. The missing gun, Hornby's forged note, Clara's coerced letter. It was all there, every lie collected in one man's trembling hands. Japp exhaled slowly. He played us all. Killed Hornby, framed Arthur, silenced Clara. God help me. I trusted him with every case for 10 years. Poirot placed a hand gently on his shoulder. You trusted because you are human, mon ami. but even the most loyal shadow conceals a darker shape behind it. The fault lies not in trust, but in blindness to where it ends. Hastings looked toward the river. So it's over now. Poirot was silent for a moment. Then, softly, "No, Hastings, it is finished. There is a difference. Justice may end a case, but it does not end the sorrow it leaves behind." They turned to go. Behind them, the first light of morning struck the steel of the bridge, gleaming like a blade drawn clean. The river carried the remnants of the night away. Blood, secrets, the last whisper of deceit into its endless current. And beneath the vast sky of London, Hercule Poirot walked on, his little grey cells at peace at last, though the silence that followed was heavier than victory could ever be. The city was slow to wake the next morning, its streets slick with rain, and its river still swollen from the night before. Poirot sat by his window in silence, watching the faint grey light creep across the rooftops. The world outside seemed deceptively calm, yet beneath that quiet veneer, the machinery of deceit was still turning. Hastings entered with the morning paper, his expression uneasy. "They've printed it already," he said, dropping it onto the table. "Sergeant Harris. Murderer and fraud. Poirot solves the Iron Bridge mystery. They're calling it closed." Poirot glanced at the headline, then folded the paper neatly without reading further. "Ah, mon ami, how eager the world is to tidy up its tragedies. But truth, like the river, does not rest when one stone is removed. It finds another path." Hastings frowned. "You think there's more to it? But Harris, he confessed with his actions, didn't he? The missing evidence, the killings, all of it." Poirot rose, adjusting his cuffs with that precise elegance that masked deep thought. "Oui, but actions may confess what the lips never intended. Harris played the villain well, but I begin to wonder if even he knew the whole performance he was part of." Japp arrived soon after, still weary from the previous night's chaos. His coat dripped rain onto the floor, his voice gravelly with exhaustion. "Poirot, I'd like to believe you're wrong, but something's been bothering me too. We went through Harris's rooms this morning. He kept everything, papers, trinkets, receipts, but one thing's missing." "And that is?" Poirot asked. "The watch," Japp said grimly. "Langdon's watch. It wasn't on him when we found his body. The case we recovered, the files, Hornby's letter, they were all there. But the watch, the centrepiece of this whole affair, gone again, for the first time." Poirot's composure faltered. His voice lowered. "Gone?" "Vanished. As if it never existed." Poirot's eyes narrowed. He turned toward the window, his reflection caught faintly in the misty glass. "Then, mon ami, the pattern is indeed complete. The thief does not steal gold, he steals meaning. Someone still wishes to erase the story that began beneath that bridge." Hastings looked bewildered. "But who could want that? Harris is dead." Poirot remained silent for a long moment. "Tell me, Japp," he said finally, "who catalogued the evidence after Harris's death?" Japp frowned. "The usual process. Miss Marchand from Records was assigned to inventory the recovered items." Poirot turned sharply. "Miss Marchand, the same clerk who handled the Langdon estate files before they vanished." Japp's face changed. "You think she's involved?" "I think," Poirot said slowly, "that we have seen her hand before, but we mistook it for another's." The three of them set out for Scotland Yard once more, the wind whipping at their coats as the storm threatened to return. Inside, the corridors were dim and quiet, the hum of typewriters a steady background rhythm. Miss Marchand was at her desk as calm as ever, neat hair, tidy stack of folders, ink-stained fingertips. She looked up when they entered, polite but unfazed. "Good morning, gentlemen. Inspector Japp, Monsieur Poirot. I heard about the Harris case. A dreadful thing." "Indeed," said Poirot, studying her face. "It seems tragedy follows this case like a shadow. You've been most helpful throughout the investigation, mademoiselle. I trust you completed the new inventory of evidence." She smiled faintly. "Of course. Everything has been logged properly this time." Poirot inclined his head. "May I see the file?" "Certainly." She opened a drawer, producing a leather-bound ledger. Poirot took it delicately, flipping through the pages with his immaculate fingertips. Each entry was written in perfect script. Dates, item numbers, case references. But one space caught his eye. Langdon. Personal effects. Watch. Removed for photographic documentation. No signature, no return notation. Poirot looked up slowly. And who, mademoiselle, performed this photographic documentation? Her answer came without hesitation. I did, Monsieur Poirot, as per standard procedure. Hastings shifted uneasily beside him. There was something too measured in her voice, too careful in her calm. Poirot smiled gently. Ah, then it is you who hold the final key to our puzzle. She blinked, uncertain. I'm not sure what you mean. Only that you have been the one constant in a tale full of shifting players, Poirot said softly. When Langdon reopened his wife's records, whose hands first received them at the bank, yours. When Hornby's confession letter was catalogued, yours again. And now, when the watch that bound all these deaths together disappears, it vanishes under your care once more. Her poise trembled. That's absurd. You can't accuse me on coincidence. No, not coincidence, said Poirot, stepping closer. Pattern. A pattern that began long before the bridge, long before poor Harris. You see, mademoiselle, you too once worked for the Langdons' bank. Your name appears in the old ledgers under your maiden name, Marchand Wren. The colour drained from her face. Hastings gasped softly. Wren? Poirot nodded. Oui, Hastings, Clara's sister. For the first time, Miss Marchand's composure cracked. Her voice wavered, low and bitter. You think you understand, but you know nothing of what they did. Geoffrey Langdon ruined my family. My sister's dismissal destroyed her. She begged him to help her, and he cast her aside. Even after his wife's death, he used her affection as a leash. He made her believe he'd make amends, and then he betrayed her again. Poirot's tone remained calm, though his eyes grew colder. So you sought revenge. You followed the old wounds like a map. You helped Hornby cover the thefts, then killed him when he became a liability. You lured Clara to the bridge and silenced her. And when Harris began to suspect you, you used him as a scapegoat and had him killed in his cell. No, she whispered fiercely. Harris killed himself. I only gave him the means. He would have betrayed me otherwise. He was weak. Poirot's voice softened, almost sorrowful. And Arthur Langdon? Did you pity him too? Her eyes filled with something sharp and dark. Arthur was his father's mirror. Arrogant, entitled. He would have exposed everything. So yes, I made sure he never could. Japp stepped forward, hand on his revolver. That's enough. But Poirot raised a hand. One moment, Inspector. There is one last detail to confirm. He turned toward the window, the rain streaking faintly down the glass. You stole the watch from Harris's body, because you believed it was only symbolic. But you did not open it, did you? Her lips parted, the faintest flicker of confusion crossing her face. Poirot took a small object from his pocket, the watch, gleaming once more. You see, mademoiselle, I anticipated that someone would wish to retrieve it, so I left a replica in its place. The real one has been in my possession since yesterday, and inside there was more than a message. He pressed the latch open. Within, beneath the hidden panel, lay a second note in Geoffrey Langdon's hand. If I should die, the one who comes after me wears the mask of order. The truth lies not in theft, but in the hands that record it. Japp stared. Good Lord, he meant her. Poirot's gaze returned to her, steady, final. Geoffrey Langdon, dying beneath that bridge, tried to tell us what even death could not silence. You, mademoiselle, have always been the record-keeper of this tragedy. The one who erased, rewrote, replaced. You buried your crimes beneath order and ink. Miss Marchand sank into her chair, her calm finally dissolving. He deserved it, she whispered. All of them did. Poirot looked at her a long time, then said quietly, And yet, mademoiselle, the river does not judge. It only carries away what men throw into it. But even it could not carry away the truth. As Japp led her out, the storm broke fully over the city. Poirot stood once more by the window, listening to the steady rhythm of rain on glass. Hastings joined him, voice low. So it was her all along? Oui, mon ami, said Poirot softly. From the first note beneath the bridge to the last missing file, she was the pattern, the hand that stitched the whole tapestry together. We only needed to look where everything appeared most tidy. The watch ticked in his hand once more, steady and unbroken, as though time itself had decided that at last its order had been restored. The storm raged well into the evening, the sound of rain and wind against the glass a restless chorus that seemed unwilling to let the day die quietly. Poirot remained at his desk long after Japp and Hastings had left for the night, his small lamp the only pool of light in the dim apartment. On the desk before him lay the recovered watch, its ticking faint and rhythmic, a heartbeat from a life long ended. Beneath it, the confession Marchand had signed, a neat, composed document written in a steady hand that betrayed neither panic nor remorse. But something in its perfection troubled him. It was too symmetrical, too restrained. There was anger in her, yes, and grief perhaps, but not the kind that drove one to orchestrate a symphony of death. As he read and reread her words, a thought began to stir, an unease that grew until he could no longer ignore it. He reached for the telephone. "Japp," he said, when the inspector's groggy voice answered, "I must see the prisoner at once, before the night ends." "Good Lord, Poirot, it's past midnight." "Then it is the perfect hour, mon ami. The truth, like the murderer, never sleeps." When Poirot arrived at the yard, the corridors were hushed, save for the distant hum of a typewriter somewhere down the hall. Miss Marchand sat in the small interrogation room, her wrists lightly chained, her posture unnervingly calm. She looked up as Poirot entered, and a faint smile touched her lips. "I wondered when you'd come," she said softly. "You don't strike me as a man who sleeps easily when a pattern feels unfinished." "Indeed," said Poirot, taking a seat opposite her. "You are perceptive, mademoiselle. But I suspect you have been perceptive all your life, n'est-ce pas? Even as a child." Her eyes glimmered faintly in the low light. "Why are you here, Monsieur Poirot? To gloat? To ask for tears? You'll find neither." He shook his head. "Non. I came because something remains unspoken. You have told us how. You killed, but not why. You spoke of revenge, of betrayal. But it was too practiced, too prepared. There is another truth beneath it, I think, one that even you have not named aloud." For the first time her composure faltered, only slightly, like a hairline crack in glass. "You think I don't know my own mind?" Poirot leaned forward, his gaze steady, voice quiet but cutting through the silence. "I think you know only the part of it that protects you from the other. You speak of your sister as though she were a casualty of love, yet everything you did, every death, every lie, was not for her memory, but for something you could not destroy. Him. Geoffrey Langdon." She stiffened. "Don't—" "Yes," Poirot continued, relentless but gentle. "You despised him, yet you loved him. You wanted him to suffer, but you also wanted him to see you, to acknowledge what he had done to your sister, to you, to every life he touched with indifference. It was not revenge you sought. It was recognition." Her lips trembled, then pressed tightly together. "You don't understand what it was like," she whispered. Clara adored him. He made her feel seen. When he cast her aside, she broke, bit by bit. I watched her disappear. She wrote letters, begged him to speak to her. He never did. When she died, he sent flowers, as though that made him innocent. She looked up, and there was no calm now, only the quiet fury of a long-caged storm. "I went to his house once, you know, years later. He didn't even remember my face. He called me Miss Wren, and thanked me for my work at the bank. He didn't even remember the woman he destroyed, and still he kept that watch, the one she had given him. That's when I knew. People like him, men who live untouched by consequence, they don't bleed when you wound them. They only bleed when they lose control." Poirot said nothing. He watched her closely, letting the silence breathe. Then softly, "And so you created a masterpiece, did you not? A web in which every string was a punishment. Hornby, who profited from your sister's ruin. Arthur, who mirrored his father's coldness. Harris, who dared to question your order. And finally Clara, your own blood, because she threatened to betray the one secret you could not allow the world to see, that beneath the mask of vengeance lived a woman still enslaved by love." Marchand's hands clenched against the table. "I didn't love him." "Non," said Poirot quietly. "You worshipped him. Love seeks forgiveness. Worship seeks destruction." Her voice broke then, a single, trembling whisper. "I wanted him to see me, just once, as something he could not dismiss. Something powerful. He took everything from us and left as though nothing had happened. When I saw him that night under the bridge, I thought, if I killed him there, where he had ruined her, perhaps she would rest. But when he fell, when the water swallowed him, it wasn't peace I felt. It was silence. Just silence. She fell quiet, her breathing shallow. Poirot leaned back slightly, his expression unreadable, almost sorrowful. "You see, mademoiselle, you are not a monster, only a woman who mistook justice for creation. You sought to make meaning out of pain, to craft a pattern where the world had given you chaos, but patterns built on grief collapse beneath their own symmetry." Marchand's eyes lifted, glistening with something neither defiance nor regret, but exhaustion. "You sound almost sorry for me." "Ah," Poirot said softly, "perhaps I am. You were brilliant, meticulous, and utterly doomed. The kind of mind that could have built empires chose instead to build a tomb." Japp appeared in the doorway then, clearing his throat softly. "Time's up." Poirot rose. "Merci, Inspector." He turned back to Marchand. "There is one thing you should know before I leave. Geoffrey Langdon did not forget your sister. He wrote to her the week before she died. The letter was never sent. It was found in his study after his death. He meant to ask forgiveness." Marchand's face went still, the blood draining from her cheeks. "You're lying." Poirot shook his head. "Non. He could not forgive himself, and so he delayed, as men often do when the heart is too cowardly to speak. Had you found that letter, perhaps this story would have ended differently. But alas, fate, mademoiselle, is not kind to those who act before they understand." He turned to leave, but her voice stopped him. It was low, trembling. "What did it say?" Poirot paused in the doorway. "Only this. I wronged her, and I know it. If there is any grace left in the world, I hope she knows that I never forgot." The silence that followed was longer than any word he could offer. When he glanced back, she was staring at her hands, her lips parted in a soundless breath that might have been grief or relief. He did not know. Outside, the rain had ceased. The city lay washed and still, its lamplight reflected in the gleam of the wet streets. Hastings waited by the car, looking up anxiously as Poirot approached. "You've been gone ages. Did she confess more?" Poirot looked out across the river, where the iron bridge loomed faintly through the mist. "She confessed what mattered, Hastings. The motive was not written in ink or in greed, but in the quiet corner of a heart that could not bear to be forgotten." Hastings frowned. "You mean she killed all those people just because she loved him?" Poirot smiled faintly, but there was no triumph in it, only weariness. "Non, mon ami, because she could not stop. Love, when twisted by pain, becomes the most merciless master of it all. It demands not affection, but endurance, and in that endurance men and women lose themselves entirely." They drove in silence for a while, the hum of the motor blending with the sighing wind. At last Hastings said, "I suppose it's over now." Poirot looked once more at the bridge receding behind them, its iron ribs fading into the fog. "Yes," he said softly. "Over, but never ended. For crimes of passion, Hastings, are like ripples upon the river. They vanish from sight, but their motion never truly ceases. And somewhere in the dark current below, unseen by either man, the water moved on, endlessly carrying what the living could not bear to remember, and what the dead could never quite forget." The night was unnervingly still, as though London itself was holding its breath. Even the rain had ceased, leaving only the soft hiss of the river beyond the window. In the dimly lit office at Scotland Yard, Hercule Poirot stood by the desk, his reflection shimmering faintly in the glass pane. Japp was there too, arms folded, pacing in short, deliberate strides. Hastings sat by the wall, his unease visible in every restless movement. "She's been quiet since yesterday," Japp muttered. "Refuses to eat, refuses to speak. If she thinks she can hold out in silence—" "She will not," Poirot interrupted softly. "Silence, my friend, is never eternal. It is but the sound before confession." Japp frowned. "She already confessed." Poirot turned slightly, his expression unreadable. "No, Inspector. She performed a confession. A confession of guilt, yes, but not of truth. You see, what she told us last night was the story she wished us to believe. But there is one thread she dared not pull, for fear that the entire tapestry would unravel." Hastings leaned forward, puzzled. "You mean she's still hiding something? After everything?" Poirot nodded. "Indeed, something essential. There is one more name, one more accomplice, unspoken." Japp let out an incredulous laugh. "Good Lord, Poirot, haven't we had enough accomplices? Hornby, Harris, Arthur, all dead. How many ghosts does one case need?" Poirot's eyes glinted. Ah, but the ghosts, they multiply when the truth is ignored. No, my friends, there is one living accomplice, the one who guided her hand when the heart hesitated, a presence behind her actions, invisible yet constant. Japp frowned. Then who? We've questioned everyone connected to her. Poirot's gaze shifted to the far corner of the room, where a small cabinet of files stood half open. Not everyone, mon ami. He walked over, gently lifting one of the drawers. There was someone who always lingered at the edge of the scene, someone who appeared helpful, forgettable, yet was always near when crucial moments unfolded. When the watch first vanished, when the forged letter appeared, when the false confessions passed through the chain of evidence, this person was always present, always quiet. Japp's eyes widened slowly. You can't mean— Yes, said Poirot, closing the drawer with a soft click. The constable who guarded the evidence room the night it was broken into, the man who swore he saw a woman, who gave us her description, her perfume, her imagined movements. It was he who led us to Clara Wren's flat, who misdirected the search, who placed the blame precisely where the murderer desired. Japp exhaled heavily. Constable Reeves. Oui, said Poirot. Our good Reeves. So loyal, so silent, so easily overlooked. But in truth he was her eyes and her hands outside those prison walls. Japp's face darkened. You're suggesting he was working with Marchand? Poirot's voice dropped. Non, he was not her servant but her equal, the one who believed as she did, that Geoffrey Langdon's death was not murder but justice. They shared the same wound, Inspector, though it wore different scars. Hastings looked shaken. Then, he loved her? Of course, said Poirot softly. It is always love, Hastings. Love, or the echo of it. Japp swore under his breath. He's on duty tonight downstairs. I'll bring him up. Poirot raised a hand. No, allow me. A few minutes later, Reeves entered. He was young, perhaps too young for such a grim story. His uniform neat, his face composed, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of wariness when they met Poirot's. You wanted to see me, sir? Poirot smiled faintly. Oui, Monsieur Reeves, please. Sit. The constable hesitated, then obeyed. Poirot studied him quietly for a moment, the way a physician studies a patient who does not yet know he is ill. You have served the yard for what, 5 years? Nearly 6, sir. An admirable record. You are thorough, precise, perhaps even, how shall we say, devoted. Reeves frowned slightly. I do my duty, sir. Ah, yes, Poirot murmured. Duty, a fine word. But tell me, my friend, when does duty become worship? Reeves blinked, confused. I don't follow. Poirot stepped closer. When you guarded the evidence room that night, you said a woman came to see you. A woman from records. You described her well. Too well, in fact. You told us her scent, her voice, even the colour of her gloves. And yet the room was dimly lit. The corridor was empty. The light flickered only once. So tell me, how could you have known so much of her? Reeves's jaw tightened. I just remember, that's all. Poirot's voice sharpened. No. You remember what you saw because you were there with her, because you opened the door for her, because you destroyed what she could not risk to touch. The young man's composure faltered. His hand twitched against his knee. Ah, said Poirot softly. Do not be afraid, monsieur. I do not judge you. You loved her, n'est-ce pas? You saw in her sorrow something noble, something greater than yourself. You thought perhaps you could save her by helping her complete her work, by burning the evidence, by silencing her sister's guilt, by ensuring that the world would remember her not as a criminal, but as an avenger. Reeves's breath came uneven now. You don't understand. She wasn't evil. She was broken. She wanted to make things right. The others, they deserved what they got. Poirot's eyes softened. Ah, my poor boy. And what of her? Did she deserve what she has now? Reeves's voice cracked. I never meant for her to be caught. She said she would stop after Langdon, but then Hornby. He threatened to expose her, and Clara wouldn't keep quiet. She said she'd go to you. I begged her not to, but she wouldn't listen. So I stopped her. I didn't mean to kill her. I just wanted her to be silent. Japp stepped forward, face grim. You strangled her at the docks. Reeves looked down, his voice trembling. She was crying. I thought if she'd stop, everything would end. Then Harris found out, and Marchand, she made me promise to take care of him too. She said we'd be free then." Poirot's voice grew quiet. "And were you?" Reeves looked up, and for the first time his mask shattered. No, she changed. After Langdon, after her sister's death, she changed. I didn't recognize her anymore. She started talking about cleansing, about order, about how none of it mattered if people like him kept living. I told her to stop, but she said I was weak. She said I was like them. He swallowed hard, eyes wet. I loved her. I thought she needed me, but she only needed someone to carry her guilt. Poirot nodded slowly. "And now you see, mon pauvre garçon, that love which serves madness becomes madness itself. You did not love her. You obeyed her, and obedience, without reason, is the cruelest devotion of all." Reeves stood abruptly, tears streaking his face. "You think I don't know that? You think I can live with what I've done?" His hand went to his belt, where his revolver hung loosely in its holster. "Reeves!" Japp barked, reaching for his own weapon. But Poirot raised a hand, calm and firm. "No." The young man's hand froze. Poirot stepped closer, his voice low but steady, cutting through the tension like a thread of light. "There has been enough death, mon garçon. You cannot restore her by joining her. You cannot atone by vanishing. You must live and remember. That will be your punishment and your mercy." Reeves trembled, the fight leaving him all at once. The revolver slipped from his grasp and clattered to the floor. Japp exhaled, signalling the guards. Reeves did not resist as they took him away. When the door closed, Hastings let out a long, shaky breath. "I thought he was going to do it, Poirot. Good heavens, how did you know he wouldn't pull the trigger?" Poirot turned to him with a weary smile. "Because, my friend, he was not a killer at heart. He was a mirror, reflecting the madness of the woman he loved. And when the mirror breaks, it does not shatter outwards, but inwards." He looked toward the window then, where the river glimmered, faintly beneath the street lamps. "It is finished now. All the pieces are in place," Japp sighed. "A hell of a case, Poirot. I'll not forget this one." "Nor I, mon ami," said Poirot softly. "For beneath all the lies, it was never truly about crime, but about love, and the terrible things love makes us believe we are right to do." The rain began again, light and steady. Poirot stood in silence for a long while, watching the mist curl over the water below, until even the lights of the bridge seemed to fade into the darkness. The dawn came reluctantly, its pale light creeping through the fog like a hesitant confession. The rain had stopped, leaving behind streets that glistened with the reflection of gas lamps and the weary shuffle of a city trying to forget the night's horrors. Inside Scotland Yard, the air was heavy with the quiet satisfaction that follows a case concluded. Files were being sealed, names were being crossed off ledgers, and in the corner office Inspector Japp poured himself a long overdue cup of coffee. Poirot, however, was not seated. He stood near the window, hands clasped neatly behind his back, his gaze distant as though the world outside whispered something the rest could not hear. Hastings watched him uneasily. "Well," said Japp, finally breaking the silence, "that's that. Reeves will face trial, Marchand will hang, and the Yard can finally breathe again. It's all over, Poirot." Poirot turned slightly, his eyes soft but unreadable. "Is it, mon ami?" Japp frowned. "Don't tell me you're starting again." Poirot smiled faintly. No. I'm merely thinking, as one does when all the pieces have fallen into place, whether the picture we have built is truly the one the puzzle intended." Hastings sighed. "Poirot," the man confessed. "What more can there be?" Poirot didn't answer immediately. He stepped closer to Japp's desk, his voice calm but precise. "Confession, my dear Hastings, is not always the mirror of truth. Sometimes it is its mask. Reeves confessed to what he did. But he confessed also to what he was made to believe he did." Japp straightened. "Made to believe? You think he was manipulated?" "Non, not by Marchand. By someone else entirely." Poirot's eyes glittered with sudden intensity. "Someone who ensured every trail, every false scent, every confession led us to the same convenient end. The perfect illusion. Two lovers bound by guilt, a tragic spiral of vengeance. Neat, emotional, believable." Hastings blinked. "But who could?" Poirot raised a finger. "That, mon ami, is what we shall soon discover." Moments later they descended the long corridor leading to the holding cells. A constable nodded as they passed. The air grew colder, damp with the lingering chill of stone walls. Marchand's cell was at the far end, quiet, its door open slightly. Inside, she sat on the edge of her cot, her hair unbound, her hands resting calmly on her lap. When she looked up, there was no fear in her eyes, only a strange, exhausted amusement. "Back again, Monsieur Poirot," she said softly. "Come to see if I've repented." Poirot inclined his head. "I've come to ask only one question, mademoiselle. A question of loyalty." She tilted her head. "Loyalty? Oui. You see, you claim to have acted for love, for vengeance, for the memory of your sister. Yet, you never mentioned who first told you that Geoffrey Langdon was meeting Hornby under the bridge that night." Her lips parted, then closed again. "It doesn't matter who told me. I saw them myself." "Non," said Poirot quietly. "You saw them because you were told to look, because someone knew exactly where your grief would lead you, and because that person needed Geoffrey Langdon dead, but not by their own hand." Marchand's composure faltered. "You're imagining things." Poirot stepped closer. "Am I? Then perhaps you can explain how Reeves, who supposedly loved you, learned of Hornby's blackmail, something known only to you and one other man, Inspector Japp." The silence that followed was thick and absolute. Japp's voice cut through it, sharp and defensive. "Now wait just a minute, Poirot. You can't." Poirot turned slowly to face him. "Ah, but I can, mon cher. I did not wish to believe it at first, but when I reviewed every event, the lost evidence, the forged notes, the perfect timing of each discovery, there was one thing that could not be coincidence. You, Japp, were always one step before the killer. You arrived too soon at every scene, too prepared for every clue." Japp's face hardened. "You're out of line." "Perhaps," Poirot said evenly, "but let us see. When the evidence vanished, you claimed it was Harris who broke the lock, yet the records showed no forced entry. When I examined the hinges, I found marks consistent with a skeleton key, a type carried only by senior officers. You, my friend, had that key." Japp's jaw tightened. "I was securing the evidence, same as you," Poirot nodded. "Oui, securing it indeed, by removing what could reveal your involvement. You knew Marchand's sister had been dismissed under Langdon's watch. You handled the old bank files yourself years ago, and when Marchand returned to London, you saw her brilliance, her control, and you found in her a reflection of your own bitterness. She became your instrument, did she not? A weapon of elegance and passion to do what you could not. Punish those who corrupted the system you served." Marchand's breathing quickened. "You're lying," she whispered, though her eyes flickered toward Japp. Poirot went on, relentless yet sorrowful. "You promised her justice, Inspector. You guided her. You gave her names, and when she went too far, you silenced the loose ends yourself. Hornby, Arthur, Harris. You made it appear as if she had orchestrated everything, but in truth, you conducted the entire symphony." Japp took a step forward, his face pale but furious. "You've lost your mind. You think I'd risk my career, my life, for that woman?" Poirot's voice dropped. "Not for her, for yourself, for the illusion that you were still the righteous man. When the system failed you, you built your own. You saw corruption at the yard, at the banks, in the courts, and you decided you would become its cleansing flame. But flames, my dear Japp, do not choose what they burn." For a moment no one spoke. Marchand's face drained of colour. "It was you," she whispered, horror dawning. "You told me about Hornby. You told me Arthur had reopened the accounts. You said—" Japp's expression cracked. Rage, then grief, then something like despair. "You don't understand, Poirot. They were all guilty, every last one of them. Hornby, Langdon, even the yard's superiors. They buried crimes beneath protocol. I was cleaning the rot." Poirot's gaze was steady, almost compassionate. "But rot, mon ami, cannot be cleansed by decay. You sought to play God, and in doing so, became the very corruption you despised." Japp's hand went to his coat, fumbling for his revolver. The guards outside stirred, but Poirot raised a calm hand. "Non," he said softly. "Do not. You have already taken too much from the world." For a heartbeat it seemed as if Japp might resist. His fingers trembled, his eyes wet with fury and regret. But then his arm fell to his side, the weapon clattering to the floor. He exhaled shakily, his voice barely more than a whisper. "You were supposed to stop me, Poirot. You always stopped me before I went too far." Poirot's expression softened with pain. "And I have now, mon vieux. but too late. The guards moved in silently, taking him by the arms. He did not struggle as they led him away, his shoulders heavy, his gaze distant. Marchand sat motionless on the cot, her eyes hollow. "He used me," she said faintly. "All of it, everything I did. It wasn't even mine." Poirot turned toward her, his tone gentle but firm. "No, mademoiselle. He did not make you a murderer. He only gave you permission to become what your grief had already imagined. The choice, as always, was your own." When he and Hastings emerged into the courtyard, the first light of dawn was breaking through the fog. The city's bells began to toll, a slow, solemn rhythm that echoed through the empty streets. Hastings walked beside him in silence for a long while before speaking. "I can't believe it was Jap, Poirot, after all these years." Poirot looked up at the pale sky, his voice quiet but certain. "Evil, mon ami, does not always wear the face of the stranger. Sometimes it hides in the reflection of a friend. It waits, patient, in the shadow of righteousness, until even the finest heart begins to believe it acts for good." They reached the embankment, where the river moved slow and endless beneath the bridge, the same bridge that had begun it all. Poirot paused, gazing at its iron arches silhouetted against the rising sun. "It is over," Hastings said softly. Poirot shook his head. "Non, Hastings. It is merely complete, and there is a great difference." The wind shifted, carrying the faint toll of the bells across the water. Poirot's gaze lingered on the dark current below, where the first rays of sunlight turned the river's surface to gold. His voice, when he finally spoke again, was no louder than a whisper. "Justice, mon ami, is never finished. It merely waits for the next bridge." The morning after Inspector Japp's arrest broke with a silence that seemed heavier than thunder. The sky hung low and grey, the Thames sluggish beneath the iron bridge that had become both cradle and grave to so many secrets. Within Scotland Yard the corridors hummed with unease. Men spoke in low tones, glancing toward closed office doors. No one knew what to say. No one wanted to believe it. Poirot arrived quietly, his hat held low, his coat immaculate despite the weather. There were no reporters, no flashbulbs, just the hush that follows tragedy. Hastings met him in the entrance hall, his face pale and drawn. "They've transferred him," Hastings said softly. "Jap. Early this morning. They didn't want the press getting hold of it." Poirot nodded. "And Mademoiselle Marchand?" "She's in the infirmary. Tried to... Well, she's in no condition to stand trial yet." Hastings hesitated. "Poirot, I keep turning it over in my head, and I still can't believe it. Jap, of all people. You worked with him for years." Poirot's voice was gentle but distant. "Yes, he was my friend. But friendship, mon ami, does not blind the eyes of the little grey cells. It only makes the truth more sorrowful to see." They walked together down the dim corridor toward the Commissioner's office. Superintendent Hale, a severe man with iron-grey hair, was waiting inside. He gestured for Poirot to sit. "I've read your statement," he said shortly. "I still find it difficult to believe that an inspector of Japp's standing could be capable of all this." Poirot folded his hands. "Ah, but belief, monsieur, is the enemy of logic. It allows the impossible to stand in daylight simply because it wears a familiar face." Hale sighed. "The press is circling like vultures. They want details, the motive, the victims, every scandalous link. If there's anything else you can tell me, now's the time." Poirot inclined his head. "Then I shall explain as one explains a tapestry, oui? From the back side where the threads cross and tangle, and meaning is only visible to those who care to see." He leaned forward slightly. "It began not with Geoffrey Langdon's death, but long before it, with the Langdon Bank scandal 15 years ago. Japp investigated that case. He found corruption at every level, but the higher officials buried it. They forced him to close the file to protect men of power. It was his first defeat, and it wounded him deeply. That, monsieur, was the seed of obsession." Hale listened, unmoving, his face like stone. "Years later," Poirot continued, "Marchand, then Miss Wren, was dismissed from that same bank. Her sister Clara's disgrace was the final straw for Langdon's conscience. He intended to expose the embezzlement himself, but he told the wrong man, Jap. By then, the inspector had convinced himself that justice could no longer be achieved through law. He decided to deliver it by his own hand." Hastings stared at him, stricken. "But Poirot, he couldn't have planned everything from the start." "Non, said Poirot softly. At first he only meant to use Marchand to manipulate her grief, her desire for revenge. But when she proved as brilliant as she was dangerous, he saw in her an ally. He fed her the information she needed: Hornby's guilt, Arthur's weakness, Harris's loyalty. He shaped each act, each death, into a sermon of his own making. Hale frowned. And Reeves? A soldier of opportunity, Poirot said. The weak link Japp needed to do the work he could not. Reeves carried out the crimes that required visible hands. When his guilt began to show, Japp silenced him too. By the end, he had orchestrated an entire tragedy that appeared, to the world, as a passionate crime of love and madness. The superintendent leaned back heavily, rubbing his temples. And you discovered this? How? Poirot smiled faintly. By listening, monsieur. Always by listening. Do you recall the night we found Reeves's body in the cell? Japp told me the coroner estimated the death at midnight. Yet, at that very hour, Japp was with me at the bridge. He could not have known the time unless he had arranged it, and when Marchand was arrested, he insisted she be held in isolation, claiming she was suicidal. In truth, he feared she might speak before he could silence her. Hale looked stunned. But what finally gave him away? Poirot's voice softened. A watch. He lifted Geoffrey Langdon's silver timepiece from his pocket, its face polished, its ticking steady. Japp had insisted I hand it to the evidence clerk weeks ago, but when I checked the records it had vanished. Only after his arrest did I discover it in his office drawer. Inside, beneath the inner plate, was a small engraving, one I had missed before. It read, "To my friend Japp, may justice always be our compass. Signed, Geoffrey Langdon." Poirot paused, his gaze far away. Langdon had trusted him implicitly. He had gone to the bridge that night to meet Japp, not Marchand. But she arrived first, sent by him, believing Langdon to be the villain. When she struck, Japp waited in the shadows. He let her believe she had killed a guilty man. In truth, she had only completed his design. A long silence followed. The clock ticked, the city's muffled hum pressing faintly through the window panes. At last Hale spoke. "We'll see justice done, Poirot. I give you my word." Poirot rose slowly, tucking the watch into his waistcoat. "I thank you, monsieur, but justice, true justice, cannot be written in the courts. It must live here." He touched a finger to his temple. "And here." He placed a hand gently over his heart. When Poirot left the office, the fog had lifted slightly, though the day remained pale and cold. Hastings followed him down the steps of the yard. "You did it again, old man," he said quietly. "Uncovered what no one else could. But I can't help feeling hollow. It doesn't feel like a victory." Poirot smiled faintly, the lines at his eyes deepening. "Because it is not won, mon ami. There are no victories in such cases, only the restoration of order, and even that, imperfectly." They walked in silence for a while until Hastings spoke again. "You knew, didn't you, before the confession?" Poirot nodded. "I suspected. When he looked at Marchand there was pity, not anger, and pity is a luxury only the guilty afford." As they approached the embankment, a faint commotion caught their attention. A constable hurried toward them, breathless. "Monsieur Poirot, Inspector Japp, he's gone." Hastings froze. "Gone? What do you mean, gone?" The constable swallowed hard. "Escaped. Early this morning during the transfer. He must have had help. 2 guards found unconscious. The carriage overturned near Blackfriars Bridge. No sign of him since." Poirot stood very still. His expression did not change, yet something in his eyes darkened, a shadow of inevitability. "Ah," he murmured almost to himself. "So the serpent slips the noose one final time." Hastings was aghast. "But he can't possibly get far. They'll find him." "Perhaps," said Poirot softly. "Or perhaps not. Men like Japp, they vanish not into distance but into memory. They live on in the doubts they leave behind." He turned his gaze toward the river, where the fog was gathering once more along the arches of the iron bridge. The current moved steadily, carrying reflections of light and shadow alike. Hastings followed his look, his voice low. "Do you think he'll ever come back?" Poirot adjusted his hat, his tone grave but calm. "Non, Hastings. He has returned already, to the place where all his justice began." And as they stood there, the faint toll of a bell echoed through the mist. The bridge loomed over the water, silent, immutable, and endless. Poirot's voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. There are two kinds of justice in this world, mon ami, the one men write in their laws, and the one they carry in their souls. One punishes, the other waits. He looked once more toward the river, his reflection faint and flickering in its restless surface. And perhaps, he said quietly, it is the latter that never truly lets us go. The evening fell slow and cold over London, the kind of evening where the fog seemed to move with its own quiet purpose, wrapping the city in layers of whispering grey. The iron bridge stood dark against the pale horizon, its girders gleaming faintly where the street lamps caught the mist. Below, the Thames rolled on, slow, secretive, endless. Hercule Poirot stood there once more, coat buttoned to the throat, hat tilted low, his eyes following the rhythm of the water as though it spoke in a language only he could understand. Behind him, footsteps approached, hesitant, familiar. Hastings cleared his throat softly. "You knew I'd find you here," he said. "You always come back to the scene, don't you?" Poirot smiled faintly without turning. "One must say farewell properly, mon ami. A case is like a symphony. It must end with a final note, or it continues to echo in the mind forever." Hastings came to stand beside him, the river glinting faintly beneath their feet. "The yard still hasn't found him," he said quietly. "They've scoured every station, every dock. No sign of Jap. It's as if he vanished into thin air." Poirot's expression remained calm, but there was a subtle weight in his gaze, an unspoken thought that drifted between them like the fog. "A man does not vanish, Hastings. He only hides himself in plain sight. The question is, where would justice go, when it no longer trusts the courts to carry it?" Hastings frowned. "You think he's still in London?" Poirot looked toward the faint outline of St. Paul's dome through the mist. "Perhaps. Or perhaps he's already farther than any of us could follow. But I have learned something, my friend. Men like Jap do not run from guilt. They run toward the truth they have twisted, seeking to justify it even to their dying breath." A gust of wind stirred the water, and for a moment the sound of a boat horn echoed through the fog. Poirot turned his head slightly, his eyes narrowing. Something small floated near the river's edge, caught in the current, a glint of metal reflecting the weak light from above. Without hesitation, Poirot stepped closer to the railing. "Do you see that, Hastings?" Hastings leaned over. "A piece of metal looks like... Wait, is that..." "Yes," Poirot murmured. "A pocket watch." A constable nearby helped retrieve it with a long pole, handing it carefully to Poirot. He turned it over in his gloved hands. Tarnished, waterlogged, yet unmistakable. Geoffrey Langdon's watch. The same one that had vanished, then returned, then vanished again. And now, after all the deaths and the trials, it had found its way back here, to the river where everything began. Hastings stared. Good heavens, how did it end up back here? Poirot said nothing at first. He brushed a thumb gently across the cracked glass. The hands had stopped, frozen precisely at 12 minutes past 11. The same time Langdon had died. But inside, beneath the corroded latch, something new glimmered faintly. A folded scrap of paper, wedged behind the inner plate. Poirot opened it delicately, his eyes scanning the faded ink. The message was short. "Justice knows no bridge." Hastings blinked. "What on earth does that mean?" Poirot's brow furrowed slightly. "It means, mon ami, that the one who wrote it believed justice cannot be contained by structure. Not by law, not by iron, not even by conscience. It flows like the river, changing its course when men try to bind it." Hastings looked unsettled. "You think it's from Jap?" Poirot's gaze drifted back toward the dark water. Who else would return the watch to its grave with such poetic precision? Oui, it is him. A message, not of defiance, but of warning. He is telling me that his work continues. Hastings swallowed. "But that means he's still..." "Yes," Poirot said softly. "Alive and watching." They stood there for a long moment, the city's muted sounds fading behind them. The fog pressed close, the river whispering against the stone. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell began to toll, marking the hour. Hastings broke the silence first. "What will you do now?" Poirot smiled faintly, but it was not his usual smile. "I will do what I always do, mon ami. I will think. And when a man thinks, the truth eventually comes. like a figure walking out of the mist. He slipped the watch into his pocket, the faint ticking of the mechanism, impossibly, inexplicably, beginning again, though its hands had not moved. As they turned to leave the embankment, a figure appeared on the opposite bank, blurred by distance and fog, but distinct enough to send a chill down Hastings's spine. A man in a dark overcoat standing perfectly still, watching them. He did not move. He did not wave. He simply stood, framed against the skeletal arch of the bridge, before vanishing into the mist as suddenly as he had appeared. Hastings stopped in his tracks. "Poirot, did you see?" But Poirot did not look back. "Oui, Hastings. I saw. But do not call out. The river carries enough ghosts already." They walked on in silence, the sound of their footsteps soft against the damp pavement. When they reached the waiting car, Poirot paused by the door, glancing once more toward the water. "Tell me," Hastings said quietly, "do you think he'll ever come back?" Poirot's voice was calm, though his eyes betrayed a strange melancholy. "Men like Japp do not return to be caught, Hastings. They return to finish what they began, and when he does, we shall be here, waiting." Hastings nodded slowly, the weight of that promise settling like the fog around them. As the car pulled away from the embankment, the bridge loomed one last time in the rear window, tall, silent, unyielding. A gull cut across the sky, its cry sharp and lonely. Then the fog swallowed everything. In the quiet of the car, Hastings turned to speak, but Poirot raised a hand. "Shh," he murmured, eyes distant. "Do you hear it?" "Hear what?" "The ticking." For a moment Hastings listened, and there it was, faint yet distinct. The sound of the watch in Poirot's pocket, beating once again though it had drowned hours ago. He shivered. "It's impossible." "Non, mon ami," Poirot said softly, gazing out the window where the city blurred past. "It is simply unsolved." And somewhere behind them, in the drifting mist over the Thames, a faint echo of footsteps followed, steady, measured, and patient, disappearing only when the bridge itself vanished from sight. The end.